Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, we're going to talk about the tick. But before we do, I want to bring up, we have a bunch of comments telling me to shave off the mustache. It looks silly, you say? But no. I've always, I've tried growing a mustache a couple times, and usually I give up within, like, the first couple of weeks, because it starts to get there, and then I say, I know this is a silly idea, and I shave it off. This time, we're going to grow it all the way out. We're going to see how it looks. We have to get there. We can't stop. Even if it starts to look like a bad idea, we're gonna get a mustache, damn. So, yes, mustache. It's happening. Just hang in there. Maybe I'll shave it off after it grows out. But, that said, The Tick came out on Amazon Prime. It was sadly not as long as I hoped it was gonna be, but everything came out all at once, so you could just sit there and binge watch the entire thing. I think it was about 6 episodes long. And, the way you could think of it is if you're familiar with The Tick, it was kind of like a gritty reboot of The Tick minus the grit. Well, I mean, there is some grit, but the Tick himself is kind of a goofy kind of hero, so it's not really too gritty. If you don't know the Tick was kind of a spoof on superheroes way back when I was a kid. You could say that really there's not exactly a strict canon Tick, because I believe that in the original comics, they were a little bit more oriented towards teenagers and things like that. They addressed more death and dismemberment and things like that. The comics opened up and it was about like the Tick, I believe, breaks out of an insane asylum, and then just kind of like goes out on the city streets to fight crime, and that's the whole backstory of the Tick. And the whole town is overrun with ninjas, and I can't remember now why, but there was like some kingpin, and he had like a bunch of flying lawyers called the Idea Men, and it was just kind of like weird and silly and fun. But he runs into like this guy named Paul the Samurai, and Paul the Samurai had smuggled in an ancient samurai sword through like a loaf of bread through customs, and every time he drew the sword, it had to taste blood before he could sheath it again, and he would constantly get mad and pull the sword out, and then realize that he jumped the gun and didn't need to kill anyone, so he had to cut his fingers. So like at some point in the comic, his hands were like covered in band-aids because he kept like pulling the sword out and then cutting his fingers so he could resheath it, because the sword had to taste blood, you see. Back when that comic came out, I believe that it was at the height of like the ninja craze. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was really big, but there was just a lot of like ninjas were really big in the 90s. So the comic kind of ran with the ninja thing because it was popular at the time, and that was kind of the big deal. But what most people are familiar with is the Fox Kids version, the one that ran on cartoons, the Saturday morning cartoon version. And I used to watch that a lot when I was a kid. And that also had a comic series that got very popular, and that kind of had its own continuity. It was similar to the original Tick comic, but a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more kid-friendly, something that you'd want younger kids to watch. There wasn't really like as much dismemberment. The original comic had a character called Man-Eating Cow, which was a cow that just actually like killed and ate people. This character did not appear in the children's cartoon. Man-Eating Cow was maybe a little bit too over the top, I guess they thought, so they just neglected Man-Eating Cow. And they added a couple of other characters to the cast who were not in the comics. And the whole thing was kind of more fun. Like a lot of people who watch the show, they remember Dinosaur Neil, which was this guy who ran around he had a dinosaur outfit. I believe he worked at like a dinosaur park, like an animatronic dinosaur park, or it was a golf course or something. There was something dinosaur themed, and he wore a dinosaur costume because of it. And then some kind of accident happened, and it caused him to grow really, really, like he became super huge, but he was still wearing the dinosaur costume. So he just kind of became a dinosaur. Like, the logic didn't really make sense, but it didn't matter because it was a big deal, and they had to stop Dinosaur Neil from destroying the city by feeding him a pill that would make him return to a normal person. So they made him, like, a giant pill to swallow. And I think they also tried to make him wear a giant pair of pants because he was technically naked, and they felt like that was indecent or something like that. I don't know, there was a mad scientist. I can't remember his logic for why Neil needed to wear a giant pair of pants, but I know that they never got Neil into those pants, and the scientist was really upset about it. I don't know if they ever went back and did something with those pants. The Tick was the kind of series that would do stuff like that, like they would say something silly or do something silly, but then not forget about it, like they would come back later and the giant pants would still be there, maybe as a recurring gag. Something like that. But the cartoon show had a lot of interesting villains that weren't in the original comic, and the original comic had a bunch of interesting things that were not in the cartoon. They picked on the moon a lot in both the original comic and the cartoon. That was kind of a recurring theme. But then they also did a live-action Tick from way back, and you can actually still find this on Amazon Prime. Weirdly, you can't watch every episode. You can only watch some of the episodes, because I tried to go back and I wanted to show Claudia the episode with the Terror in it from the live-action version. The Terror is actually a live-action exclusive character, I think. I might be wrong, like I didn't read all the Tick comics, and my memory's kind of fuzzy because it's been a long time since I watched the kids show. But I don't believe that the Tick ever battled anyone called the Terror back in those original works. What the Terror came from was that there was, like I say, a live-action Tick that came out in, I don't know what it was, maybe 2000 or something like that. It was a good while ago now. But it was kind of a low-budget thing. So it was weird. It was kind of like a sitcom of the Tick, where like you had this man and he was a superhero and he was big and he wore this like ridiculous blue outfit, and then he had his friend Arthur, who ran around in just like a pair of essentially white pajamas with like moth ears, and everyone used to joke, they'd be like, "Oh, he's a bunny," because he had like bunny ears. And you know, Arthur always just looked really harmless, and that was kind of the point of his character design, is he was an accountant, he was a little bit pudgy and out of shape, he was wearing all white, you know, he like had the goggles on and everything like that. Arthur was just totally harmless looking, and everyone thought that he was some kind of bunny, and then he would get mad and he'd be like, "I'm a moth," and he played the straight man to the Tick. And Arthur actually had quite a fair amount of spine in the original comic and cartoon, because he was the straight man to the Tick. Like, the Tick was always running off, very bold, very brash, taking actions without consulting anyone, you know, because the Tick, in his mind, he was the hero. You know, when he went to go do something, it was justice and righteousness, and so he would just take off. And then, like, Arthur was always trying to kind of keep him under control. So that was their comedic duo. In the live-action series, that was still kind of present, but the problem was that because they didn't really have much of a budget, they couldn't do a lot of action scenes. Like in the pilot, they had an action scene where a giant communist robot was activated or something like that, well after the Cold War had ended, and it was programmed to go kill Jimmy Carter, even though Jimmy Carter was like not the president any longer. So he went and he like found Jimmy Carter and then tried to murder Jimmy Carter, and then the Tick did battle with the robot. And that was like where their entire budget went, you could tell, because they had this fight scene between the Tick and the robot, and they like, you know, like they slammed his head into a falling elevator, and then like the sparks all went down, and so there's all kinds of stuff going on. But after that, they never did another fight on screen. Every time they had a fight, it was just referenced like offhand as something that occurred, like, you know, oh, he threw a dump truck, right? And then like you never got to see the dump truck being thrown, they just talked about it. And the Tick live action series actually had a bunch of characters, a couple of different characters that were not present in the original comic or the cartoon. In the original comic and cartoon, they had like American Maid, which was like just she was a woman in like a maid's outfit, but covered in like star-spangled stripes. And I think she was a spoof on Wonder Woman. You know, it was kind of like I think it was a bit of a French maid getup, but I don't know, like it was sort of just a pun, American Maid. But in the live-action version, they had some other thing. It was like she was still a Wonder Woman knockoff, but I can't recall exactly what she wore. But she was another straight man, and they had her in a duo with a character named Batmanuel. And he was sort of like in the original comic again, they had a character who was similar named Deflator Mouse, who was kind of like a spoof on Batman, but I don't really remember what Deflator Mouse did specifically in the cartoon anymore. But I know that in the live action thing, Batmanuel was kind of this, he was still sort of a Batman character, but he was really kind of more the playboy aspect of Batman. Like, he kind of wore the suit and he did the action stuff because he wanted to impress people. And so he was always getting into trouble. Like, he would park his supercar in, like, you know, do not park zone, the no parking zones in front of, like, fire hydrants, whatever. And then the police would ticket him. And so, like, he had bits. Like, I think of all the characters in that, Batmanuel is probably the most memorable and one of my favorite characters from the live-action series. The live-action series overall, the original one, was not super great. I don't think that it would pull in a lot of people, so you can go watch it, but I don't think that for the most part it doesn't have that broad of appeal. But it definitely had its moments, and a lot of its best moments came from Batmanuel. Like one of my remembers when he went out and there was like a cop ticketing his car, and the cop just looks up and he goes, "Are you Batmanuel?" And he goes, "Batmanuel." And no, why? He's like, "Oh, because you're parked in a handicapped parking spot." And Batmanuel's like, "Oh, well, I could go find him and I could go tell him to move it. Like, maybe you don't need to." And he's like, "Well, no, if Batmanuel's not here, you know, I'm not going to wait around for him to arrive at his car. I'm just going to give it the ticket." So he gets in this like scuffle with a police officer, and that was kind of how the live action series was that it was like they weren't really battling crimes. It was just like these day-to-day life things. Like Arthur goes on a date, and the Tick can't understand why that they're on a date, or like why people go on dates. And so like the Wonder Woman character is like, oh, allow me to explain, and then like it's all shown from the Tick's perspective, and she's like, oh, blah 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 marriage, blah 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 babies, and then it goes over to like it just pans over to Batman and he's like, no, blah blah blah, blah 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 condoms, blah 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 paternity suit, blah 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 good lawyer, and Batman well. And those of you who watched the original Mentally Advanced series, you might remember that Pinky at one point, she explained that she was going to kill a dragon with a box full of poison lobsters. And that actually comes from this Tick live action series, because Batman at one point, he battles this character called the Terror. And by battles, I mean he gets apprehended by the Terror, and then the Terror puts a scorpion on his chest. And then he's just like, any minute, the scorpion might sting you. It's a very dangerous scorpion. And then, like, the Terror just runs off. And so Batman, he refers to it as a poison lobster. And that amused me so much that ever since I'd seen that episode, I very frequently referred to scorpions as poison lobsters. So when it came time to write for Pinky to, like, do something to destroy a dragon, I figured, like, yeah, a box full of scorpions. No, poison lobsters. That's a good deal. I just kind of like that, like, the poison lobster. I've got the poison lobster here. So, yes. In the original series, they had this character called the Terror, and he was like a retired villain. He was old, he was decrepit, he wasn't getting around very well anymore, and so like I think the Tick wanted to go talk to him because he was really disappointed that like the villain retired for some reason. I can't recall who wanted to go talk to him, but somebody wanted to go talk to him, or I think maybe the Tick wanted to beat him up, and they were trying to explain to the Tick that he was retired and shouldn't be beaten up anymore. Like, I think that was the thing, is that they were like he was like, the Terror, he's a horrible person, and they were like, no, Tick, he's retired. And the Tick was like, what? Evil never retires. We should go beat him up right now. And so they took him to the nursing home, and then I think the Tick did something that antagonized him, and he came out of retirement specifically to battle the Tick. So he was more of a comedy villain, and he wasn't really very scary. But this Amazon Prime live action thing, like I say, it's kind of like more gritty. Because they have, I guess there is a little bit grit, there's death in it and whatnot. But they actually feature the Terror as sort of this core or very important antagonist that Arthur is trying to track down. And they have a bunch of scenes where the Terror shows up, and he's actually legitimately a fairly intimidating villain. Like, they did a good job with his costume and his makeup. The voice actor's really good. The guy sounds like haggard and tired, but he's sort of charmingly evil, or interestingly evil, in that he's got this sidekick, this kind of like right-hand person named Miss Lint, and Miss Lint is she has electricity powers. And it's kind of funny because the electricity causes like lint to attract to her body, and it sticks to her body, and so like the Terror gives her this thing that helps prevent that problem. And he's just talking to her about evil. He's like teaching her how to be evil, and he's like, I'm gonna teach you all the ropes. You want to learn, like you're eager to learn, and I'm gonna teach you everything. But first, you got to be able to wear black. So he invents something for her to help prevent the lint from sticking to her, so that she can wear black and she can be a proper villain. But he just tells her a lot of cool things. Like she's like, so I understand you murdered 4 of my henchmen, and then she's like, yeah, they were making fun of me. They were calling me Miss Lint. And he's like, you don't kill people because you're angry at them. You kill people for fun. You kill people because it's fun. And I don't know, he's just got this philosophy. You get to peek inside this sort of like villain's world from time to time, and he's like legitimately evil. But it's a good convincing sort of evil. Like, it's kind of I don't know, he just comes across as this solid like mentor character who would actually inspire people. Like, you could see people following someone like that, because although he was terrible, he was also encouraging. And it seemed like he appreciated merit in the way that they wrote him, which is pretty good. So I gotta say, they did a really good job with the Terror. I was actually fairly ambivalent about Arthur. He's a huge wet blanket in this series, and they even kind of poke fun a little bit at it. The way that they've got it is Arthur is actually the main character. Rather than the Tick being the core focus of the show, it's Arthur who's the core focus of the show. And he's just kind of this sad, whimpering kind of loser. Pretty much throughout the entire series, he doesn't really get into any sense of confidence until the very end, and then the whole thing ends, and I'm kind of perturbed about that because it was just starting to get good, and then we ended it, like I kind of hoping for a season 2. because I felt like the show was just starting to spread its wings. But it's weird though, like they chose Arthur and they made him just very weak, very spineless. He doesn't want to be involved in the superhero thing. And I believe that the original Arthur was a little bit different, is that he really wanted to be a superhero, but he really didn't have any superhero abilities. And I think that the people who knew him were all trying to discourage him from being a superhero, not because being a superhero was crazy. Like, in this live-action thing, they keep talking about how he's crazy, how he needs to take his meds, and how he needs to go to work, and do this and do that. But in the original, I think they were just like, Arthur, you know, you're not a superhero. Like, you're an accountant. Like, you're a pudgy little guy, and you're likely to get killed. And the only reason why Arthur survives as long as he does is because he knows the Tick. And I remember there was a whole comic about Arthur, like, resenting the idea that he was a sidekick. Like, he went to sidekick camp, and like Arthur and the Tick didn't really understand exactly how that dynamic worked with other superheroes. Like, Arthur didn't really think of himself as a sidekick, and like the Tick didn't really, like, he kind of thought as I can't remember who encouraged. I think that another superhero told the Tick to send Arthur to sidekick camp, and like the Tick kind of misunderstood and was like, "I've got a great camp for you, buddy." And this other guy helped him sign him up. So yeah, it was like, we're partners, you know, we're like we're a superhero team. It's not a hero and sidekick thing. Like, we're both parts of the whole here. And yeah, and they were like, well, yeah, but you're the one without powers, you know, you're the gadgety guy that makes you the sidekick. So yes, in this one though, he's really not, he really doesn't have that drive or that ambition to be a superhero. He has an obsession with finding out where the Terror is, but he's not driven to like apprehend crime initially. Like, he doesn't want to be a hero. He just wants to find where the Terror is and then notify the authorities that, oh, the Terror is here, I found his lair, you can go arrest him now. Which like I say, is not really as interesting. It's not as bold of a thing, but the show fortunately doesn't stop there. Like, it gradually kind of builds up, where as Arthur goes down this trail of breadcrumbs, he gets in deeper and deeper, and you find out that there are these other characters that want to find the Terror. So there's this one character, Miss Lint, who wants to find the Terror because she was a former henchman of his, in fact, like his lieutenant, and she wants to be working for him again because her best, you know, her golden years were when she was working with the Terror. And there's this other guy who wants to find the Terror to kill him. And I don't think that the series actually revealed why this guy wants to kill him yet, but he wants to kill him. I think it was for revenge, but, you know, the Terror killed a lot of people, so I'm not sure if they actually specifically said what revenge he was looking for, but I think he was associated with another group of heroes that get killed on screen. So yeah, so he gets in, like, and this guy who wants to kill for revenge is named Overkill, and he's kind of like a cross between like the Batman and Punisher. Like, imagine like the current kind of gritty reboot of Batman, where he's a lot darker and there's a lot more death and murder and explosions and stuff like that. But like, Batman kind of has this sort of it's an implied no-kill policy. I mean, like, he's so violent, he's probably killing people inadvertently. Although in some of the latest DC movies, he's definitely killing people. Like, I'm pretty sure Batman is just flat out, outright mangling and murdering people. And this is kind of what it's a spoof of, is this guy Overkill shows up, and instead of like apprehending the villains, he's just like stabbing them to death with knives in like a horrible visceral display. And that's why I say there's kind of like grit in the reboot. It's not exactly gritty, but there's definitely those elements of violence and killing and murder. And so the Tick has just got like this problem with Overkill. He's just like, oh, listen, we have to have a talk, mister. Like, I don't approve of your methods, and you know, like, heroes shouldn't be killing people, and da-da-da-da-da. So yes, the other thing that they do that's interesting is that they give Arthur a super suit, and unlike in the original thing, his super suit isn't just like, well, he can fly. It's actually like bulletproof, and it has these like this built-in computer system, and it does a bunch of stuff. So it's kind of an actual like fancy high-tech super suit that's designed for like real super activities. So there's potential there for Arthur to actually be like a serious lifting and active member of the team, to the point where you wouldn't just say like, well, Arthur's the sidekick and the Tick's the hero. And I guess this makes sense in context. Like I say, I would say like, oh, well, that's, you know, missing the point of the dynamic. But the way that they've written the show, it does make sense, because the central focus is on Arthur. So he would actually need to be kind of more of the hero to carry the story, because so much of the story is focused on him. He needs to grow and develop and be the hero. So he actually does need working components and stuff to make things work, and it goes well as he gets in there. He starts to kind of get comfortable with the idea that he's going to be a hero and he's going to wear the suit, and he starts to kind of explore some of the suit's capabilities. And but like I say, by the end of the series, it looks like he's going to be a superhero. Like things are kind of going positive for him, and then the whole thing ends on this big cliffhanger. And I guess I hope that they're going to do a season 2, but I don't know, we'll see. I feel like The Tick is one of those things that and actually many people love, but it's one of those like niche things, you know, like when you talk about Firefly, which was like a science fiction series about like space cowboys kinda. People were really passionate about Firefly, and they really enjoyed Firefly, but it didn't do well, because although the people who loved it like really loved it, not enough people loved it. And I worry that The Tick will wind up in the same boat, where like, you know, I really like The Tick, and I know people who like The Tick really like The Tick, but I don't know if enough people really like The Tick that it's definitely going to succeed. But I do really want it to succeed, because I do really like The Tick. So, I don't know. I'm hopeful. I guess I'll have to check again and see if there's any promise for like a second season. But I do hope that there is one. I hope that it goes over well. And on that note, like, I don't know, if you're interested in something to watch, I recommend The Tick. You should give it a shot. It does take a little while to grow, because like I said, I didn't really like Arthur that much at the beginning, but he develops into a stronger character as it goes along. So I think that that's probably the biggest weakness of the show. But overall, it's pretty solid. Like, the acting is good. I mean, like, there's not really anything that I would say. Well, the acting is solid, I guess. I don't know. I have kind of a picture in my head of what The Tick should be like, so I suppose that colors my perspective a little bit. So, I don't know. I think it's solid. I think it's fun. I enjoyed watching it. Would recommend. Check it out if you have Amazon Prime. Or if you wanted Amazon Prime for something to watch. I don't know. Check it out. It's good, and I suppose that'll be it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll catch you all next time.